Hi, good afternoon, all. And I begin by saying, dear Lord, 2 main speakers, 5 support speakers, and about 20 speakers from the floor. What more can I say? Mike? Okay. The first thing I want to say is that I had promised myself that I would not be engaged in activities like these, standing on platforms talking to people after retirement. However, I was asked to do so by Dr. Jules and felt I couldn't say no. And since Lennox recognized the fact that he, Terence, Gwen, and myself were all at the University of Toronto at the same time, I think it's fitting to say that some 43 years ago, I walked into a staff room in Holy Name Convent, and there was Dr. Jules. I had come straight out of university, had taught for a year before, but that was quite a year. Straight out of school, not a line of teacher education or anything. Dr. Jules had graduated from Teachers College. And for people in the audience, you'd be interested to know that my salary as a graduate teacher was $475 a month. And Dr. Jules, as a graduate of the Teachers College, was $330. For the Americans in the audience, that is $50 US a month. To tell you how things have changed. And Terence gave quite a tribute to Dr. Jules that I want to repeat. Basically, he said that she was able, as a servant leader, to move from the most menial and mundane task to the loftiest intellectual engagement. I want to pay tribute to her for being one of my role models for 43 years. Having said that, how do I move this? I'm not seeing the click. Oh, I see. Thanks. I'm not really going to do a full report. I'm just going to pick up to me some of the things that from yesterday to today were very intriguing contributions to this conversation. Crady calls it creditable conversations. And Dr. Howard said we have to have some difficult conversations. And I think we just had one of those difficult conversations where Lincoln felt the need to defend himself. But the comment made at the beginning of this, lives are literally hanging in the balance. We must work with urgency. And I think the critical word there is literally. Lives are literally hanging in the balance. Some people will live and some people will die as a result of the conversation that we are having. And Dr., I hope I have it right, Zukowski, in her presentation to the graduates, talked about the culture that has changed to a digital culture. And the focus that people now have more on communities of interest than communities of place because of the social media and so on. But what she said, and I don't know if you noticed, we had a variety of styles of presentation today, but there was a deep emotion that marked everything that people did. And I think some of the emotion stems from the fact that many of us feel that we have come from communities of place. We do not see our young people having such communities of place, or we are afraid of the communities of place that they have. And we are really grappling with how do we change that. So in part, we are dealing, yes, with economic issues, yes, with political issues, But we are very critically, as came from all the speakers today, dealing with deep culture issues. Culture, beliefs, values, attitudes, the way we manage life. And we have to find a way to address those issues. I don't know the name of the guy wearing the tie, I'm not even seeing him anymore, who said some of the things that they are doing in their schools. Some of the things are probably dealing with what's called the culture of poverty. And for those of us who have read the literature on culture of poverty, we would note that is not always not having. It sometimes is, it frequently is not having. But sometimes it is, what do we do with what we have? And therefore, part of what we are grappling with in this conversation is how do we help young people have that sense of values that would make best use of what they have. But equally critically, it's not only for the young people, it's for all of us, how do we make best use of what we have? I'll skip the points on credit school and classrooms for a moment, and I'll come back to it. We heard a lot today of the interface between home, school, community, and an emphasis on how do we have local government. And local government in the sense could be the formal government, such as where we just had interest in elections, or local government can be how do we marshal our own community to have the supports that we need for our schools. Sorry, I went back instead of forward. You can see that I am not of the digital age. Okay. Having spoken about home and school and community, which has been a lot of what was said today, the word entrepreneurship was mentioned. And here we want to talk about both business entrepreneurship, because let's face it, what's interesting is people quite often say that people in communities such as we are talking about, communities on the fringe, don't have a head for business. But somebody else pointed out very critically that they do have a head for business. And I think Dr. Howard said that poor people better have a head for business or else they will not survive. The challenge is we may not be interested in the kinds of business that they are involved in. And at this point, I want to mention, it was said in the little blurb on what I've done. I'm working with a group, WABI means We Are Better Youth, and somebody called Nicola Harvey, who is not a relative, well, we don't know, but as far as we know, she's not a relative, lived, and lives on Ovid Alley. And she said after the death of the 7th young people in her community, she decided to do something about it. And they formed the group We Are Better Youth, where that community, they bring their young people together for homework, for support to what they're doing, for church, and so on. And I met them for the first time as a community when I was invited to their sports day. And we were seated in somebody's gallery waiting for the sports. And I am waiting to be taken to the sports field. And then gradually it dawned on me that the sports field was the steep uphill road where they lived. Every member of the community was up and down. They did a fantastic march pass. They had all kinds of sports and games on Ovid Alley. And then what they're now doing is they extended that, and so many of the principles that the speakers articulated today, they are practicing. They decided to start with the children from early. So there are 3 groups, 4 to 7, 8 to 11, and 12 plus. They are doing modules related to nation and community, the development of the self, technology, and business. And all they do is modify the curriculum to suit the group. And the age group. Several parents come out every Saturday, that's where I should have been now, every Saturday between 3:15 and 5:15 to work with this some 65 young people. And in doing so, they do a number of other things, which to me, that concept brings together, it's not that people don't frequently have difficulties, they do. But you would notice that in addition to the difficult conversations, somebody spoke about positive confusion. We wouldn't always know what to do. We frequently would be mulling over things and so on. We will be confused. We will almost break down in public when we reflect on what is happening. But the confusion is positive and would lead us to, try things. Then to mention men and education. It was explored, and I think one of the things that could come out of this is how do we, I think Dr. Howard, again, if I can refer to him, talked about some ways in which they were having men support the groups. Then the two speakers from the floor spoke about how they can involve men in supporting it. In other words, I hope Dr. Farrell wasn't suggesting that we pay men more to teach. I know, just teasing you. But what I'm saying is it need not only be having men professionally take up the job of teaching. We may find other ways to involve them in the educational activity, and that was raised several times. The theme for today, education and parenting on the urban fringe. Can we make a difference? I think from all the 7 lead speakers, we heard ways in which we can make a difference. And from several people on the floor, we heard how they have made a difference. And what I heard Dr. Farrell Terrence say at the beginning, we need a decisive set of moves for those Catholic schools for which we are responsible. Let me repeat it. We need a decisive set of moves for those Catholic schools for which we are responsible. And somebody else mentioned a Catholic understanding of social justice in Catholic schools. And you got all the F's in terms of how you can have that. So the last 3 points talk about credi, school, and classrooms. I think there's one, oops, did it again. This time it's gone completely. We should have one last slide. One last slide, great. What do we do? You have the value, the advantage of having a community with a shared set of, a community with a shared set of values. Part of the challenge in addressing the issues you have raised is that in a society as diverse as ours, you may have, when you're dealing with a group, a whole set of different values, so it's difficult to cohere people around it. Since you are, CREDI is about, and CBM, about Catholic education for Catholics, and I imagine others, but you have that as your credo, you can use those set of values as a point of cohesion. And this is the case in what we say, what do we do? Now, we mentioned in introducing me that we had just done a study on best practice in higher education. I think the findings of that study can be very relevant here. It says an intervention is most likely to succeed when A, it's enthusiastically supported from the highest levels. You have the opportunity to shape your projects, shape your ideas, and you lead by giving it support from the highest levels. It secondly said it is most likely to succeed if based on institutional policy. You can, at this moment, well, you have been shaping it. Continue to shape. What is your institutional policy? And how is this policy going to roll down to schools? And this can be done within your community of Catholic schools, adhering to what's national policy, but ensuring that it's done in your schools in a particular way to ensure achievement. The third thing said, when it has dedicated funding, but I will say dedicated resources, not necessarily cash. And these resources can come from among yourselves. Lastly, it said, the results of this study, even if it is not enthusiastically supported, it's not based on institutional policy, and it doesn't have dedicated funding, each manager, professional, individual can foster a culture of excellence. This will not have the same effect as if it is from the center institutional policy, but there are cultures and mini-cultures, and each of you, where you are placed, can in fact foster a culture of excellence. I think that's one of the things that has been coming out of the discussion. People have been identifying areas of excellence that they have fostered despite the challenges. And therefore, in addition to asking, and I wrote this before the final conversation, what do we do, i.e. we the Catholic community? We also need to ask, what do I do? Because one of those phrases we learned when we were growing up was, it's more than a phrase, a saying, if it is to be, it is up to me. 7 little words. If it is to be, it is up to me. So you can't change the whole education system, but you can have a culture of excellence in your space, in your classroom. And what your personal striving for that culture of excellence will do is hold back those forces of fear, because we are sometimes afraid, hold back those forces of negativity, hold those forces at bay. So you can do that individually. And then when you do that and you foster it in a school, and I think everybody agreed on how critical the role of the principal is. When you do it with your community, one of the things I heard today that I do not believe, I may be wrong, I may not have the empirical evidence, but I heard there are some people who don't want their children to do well. There are some people who don't want their children to be educated. I don't believe that. I firmly believe that most parents would want to see their children do better, would want to see the children escape the dangers that they face, but they may not know how. So that close link between community and school had to foster. But sometimes you don't do it yourself. You help those you work with those positive people in your community to work with those who may be posing the greatest risk. Nothing we are saying, nothing you have said is easy. And that is the nature of these difficult conversations. The recognition that what you are trying to do, what we are trying to do, is not easy. But what is the alternative? Lastly, I want to say, from everything that has been said today, the critical role of being data-led and data-tracked. Both the two lead speakers gave us the data on what's happening in schools and communities and so on. It's important on starting an initiative to document where you are, and then to set targets on where you are going from day to day, month to month, year to year, so that you are able to say, when I came to this school, when I started to teach this class, when I started to work in this university, Dr. Rampersad, this is where we were at. Having attempted these interventions, this is where we have moved to. We slipped a bit in this way, but we moved forward in that way. And so these celebrations, I think Waif mentioned the celebrations. These celebrations give energy. It gives a sense that you are going somewhere so that you can keep moving forward. When you slip, you could look back and say, we slipped a bit here, but we moved forward a bit there, and that gives energy. Now, at 5 to 5, let me just say, this has been a fascinating conversation. We have agreed that we are going to move it from conversation to continued action or new action. And what I would suggest is if probably somebody mentioned a little think tank, a little action group, can come together, encourage all the participants in the workshop to say what they are engaged in, and begin documenting it and putting it on the website. So some new actions will emerge, but what you are also doing is documenting continuing action. Because one of the things the study on best practice said is it must be documented and it must be shared. So in documenting and sharing, you are keeping the positive vibes going, keeping them going, spreading the word, encouraging people, so that when we slip, there's a community. You know you're going to be caught by a community. You have a blessing. You have a Catholic community that can take these values and take them forward. Do. Thank you very much.